Today we're going to be starting our discussion of ancient Rome, and we're going to focus on the Roman Empire, but I do want you to know a little bit about the beginnings of Rome as a republic governed by the Senate. Now, they did not elect their senators the way we do. The Senate was made up of the heads of the aristocratic families, the wealthy families. And the lower classes were represented by appointed individuals called tribunes. They came actually from the aristocratic class, and some of them took their job of representing the interests of the lower classes more seriously than others. But the date that I want you to remember in connection with Roman culture is 27 BC to 14 AD. We're finally just before midterm getting to AD. And that's the reign of Augustus. And I chose that date for two reasons. One, Augustus is really the first person to be emperor for any length of time. Yeah, everybody counts Julius Caesar as the first emperor. But the fact is that he was assassinated almost as soon as he took the title. And so his nephew Augustus actually is the first one to be emperor for any length of time. But also, later emperors look back on his reign as the pattern. I mean, he's the one who sets the pattern for what Roman imperial culture is going to be like. Now, if you're going to conquer an empire, the first thing you need is an effective army. And the first reading I gave you, a short one, is from a Jewish writer named Josephus, who had experienced the Roman army from both sides, as an ally and an enemy. And what's important in his description is his explanation for what made the Roman army successful. It was not that their army was bigger than anybody else's. It was not that they had better weapons. It was their training, their discipline. Look at how many times words like discipline and order appear in this description. He talks about how their army was always training for battle. Now, that may seem obvious, but in fact, most ancient societies didn't do it that way. The Romans were the first large-scale society where the army was always training for war. Most ancient empires, in peacetime, used their army for construction projects. That, for example, was how the Egyptians built the pyramids. The Romans were always training for war, whether it looked like one was ready to break out or not. And the advantage that Josephus points out is that this prepares them not only physically, in terms of being in good physical condition, but also psychologically, so that they don't get frightened. They don't break down the way that most other armies did. I don't know if you've ever talked to someone who has been in combat. I have. A number of people, actually, who've, from my father-in-law, talking about some of his experiences in World War II. When I was a pastor in Florida, I had a guy in one of my churches who had been a German Luftwaffe fighter pilot in World War II. My cousin was a Navy corpsman attached to the Marines in Vietnam and also in the First Persian Gulf War. One thing everybody I've ever talked to who's been in combat, in any war, in any branch of service, in any country's service, always freely admits is that if you ain't scared, you need your head examined. And this kind of training, where it's as realistic as it possibly can be, is intended to prepare soldiers for that. It took the United States a long time to figure this out. In 1940, there were a series of large-scale Army maneuvers held here in Louisiana. And I've seen some film of it, and it was pathetic how unprepared we were. Trucks with big signs on the side saying tank, because we didn't have enough tanks. A soldier with a wooden box with a broomstick stuck in the end of it, pretending it was a machine gun. When World War II broke out in Europe in 1939, the American Army was actually smaller than the Army of Romania. It's shocking how unprepared we were. And Josephus talks about how this constant training, as realistic as it can be, line 14, is the reason why they bear the fatigue of battle so easily. Neither can any disorder remove them from their usual regularity, nor can fear affright them out of it, nor can labor tire them. And this firmness of conduct makes them always overcome those that do not have the same firmness. He talks about the layout of the camp, how it was always laid out the same way. That's so if they were attacked at night, and you're waked up in the middle of the night by the sentries on duty, that you're being attacked, you are not disoriented. You know exactly where you're supposed to be. He talks about how everything is always planned out and organized, how when they invade enemy territory, the first thing they do is always fortify their camp. They don't all work at once. Somebody's got to be watching for the enemy. And the point of all this is that that's what made the Roman army successful, their superior discipline. And as we're going to see, that fits into the Roman image of themselves. The second reading I gave you is a little bit of Virgil's Aeneid, which is the most important reading in this module, actually. One of the first things that Augustus does as emperor is to commission the Roman poet Virgil to write a great epic to stand alongside the Iliad and the Odyssey of the Greeks, justifying Rome's conquest of an empire. See, the second thing you need if you're going to conquer an empire is you need a set of ideas that is going to justify what you are doing, at least to your own people. After all, may I suggest that any time you send soldiers into combat, you are asking them to do what? You are asking them to risk their lives. And I submit to you that if they're going to do that, they need a way of believing that they are fighting for something that is worth risking your life for. And the Aeneid does that. It at least initially sets out to glorify the Roman Empire. And in the opening sections that I gave you the most extensive part of, he does that by, first of all, taking a minor character in Homer's Iliad, a Trojan warrior named Aeneas. And Virgil brings him across the Mediterranean to become the ancestor of the Romans. Now, what this was about was there is no evidence whatsoever that the Romans were actually descended from the people of ancient Troy. Virgil is making up a history to suit his political agenda. And I see people do that all the time. It's an article of faith among conservatives that there was a time in the past when America was great, not only in terms of power and wealth, but also morally pure. And I wonder exactly when that time was. When was it when we were exterminating the Native Americans? Was it when we were importing enslaved Africans? Was it the Jim Crow era? You know, when exactly was this time when America was perfectly virtuous? Because I don't know of any such time. I've encountered students in my time at Grambling who insist with a straight face that absolutely everything in the way of ideas and technology, that absolutely everything ever invented was invented by the ancient Egyptians. Really? Nobody else ever contributed anything? Just on the face of it, that seems to me to be a little bit far-fetched. Even the Romans didn't claim that. By bringing Aeneas, making Aeneas the founder of Rome, the ancestor of the Romans, what Virgil is doing is lending a legitimacy to Rome's position. In the ancient world, if you were the new kid on the block, you were a little suspect. You know, you didn't really belong. And this was a way of claiming an ancient lineage for the Romans. You know, our people go way, way back, something that you've been reading about for generations in the Trojan War. And in the early books of the Aeneid, he feels the need to put down Rome's early rivals. The first one is the Greeks. And he does that in the famous story that you encounter in here of the Trojan horse and how the Trojan priest Laocoon warns the Trojans not to take this horse into the city, and how the Greeks left a man named Sinon, whose job it is to persuade the Trojans to take that horse into the city. And if you read that excerpt, he does it brilliantly by reverse psychology. He tells them this cockamamie story about how the Greeks were going to sacrifice him, and so he ran away, and how line 95 to 100, the prophet Calchas told them to make this horse as a gift to Minerva, the Roman name for Athena, to make it so big that the Trojans couldn't take it into the city, because if they did that, then the Trojans would be able to conquer Greece, and if they didn't, and they dishonored it, then the Greeks would eventually be able to conquer the Trojans. It's called reverse psychology. If any of you have ever dealt with a 2-year-old, you have probably used this. Now, don't you eat those carrots. When, of course, you actually want them to eat the carrots, right? That's the approach that the Greeks take. Now, the point of this, how does this put down the Greeks? Well, why did the Greeks in this story have to resort to this Trojan horse? Because they couldn't beat the Trojans in a fair fight. So they had to fight dirty. Okay. The second people that Virgil has to put down are another of Rome's early rivals, the Carthaginians. Carthage was located in what is today Tunisia, but it was a colony of ancient Phoenicia, located in what is today Lebanon, just north of Israel. And the Romans fought a series of wars against the Carthaginians that the Romans called the Punic Wars, which is how you say Phoenician in Latin. See, the Romans knew the ancestral homeland of the Carthaginians. And if you've heard of Hannibal, he dates actually from these Punic Wars. He's the Carthaginian general who led an army including trained elephants, kind of the tank of the ancient world, across the Alps and rampaged in Italy for several years. His name, by the way, carries in it a link to this ancestral homeland of Phoenicia. The Hannibal, Baal, B-A-L, was the Canaanite or Phoenician storm god. You actually encounter his name in the Hebrew Bible. And the way that Virgil puts down the Carthaginians is especially important. It's the section where Aeneas has a love affair. Aeneas' wife had been killed in the siege of Troy, according to the story. And when he arrives in Carthage, he has an affair with the Carthaginian queen Dido, who herself was also widowed. And the portrayal of the two of them in Book 4 really gets at the heart of the justification for Rome's dominance of the world. In the description of Dido in Love, lines 185 to 200, it talks about how her heart is burning in the Aeneid passion. The Latin word is furor, from which we get fury, furious. But in Latin it means any powerful emotion burns. And we still talk about the heat of passion. But look at what she does, line 195. She leads Aeneas with her round the walls, showing her Sidonian wealth. Sidon was a city in the old homeland of Phoenicia. and the city she's built. So she shows him the wealth of the city and its defenses. She lets him in on their state secrets. Now, how would you react if a president did that? Because he was having an affair with a foreign head of state. And all Dido can think about is him. She longs for the banquet. She has a banquet every evening and gets him to tell the story of the fall of Troy over and over again. In fact, the account of the fall of Troy in the Aeneid is told by Aeneas to Dido, as she wants to hear the story of his adventures and Troy's fall over and over again. She hangs once more on the speaker's lips. And when they've departed and the moon in turn has quenched her light and the setting constellations urge sleep, she grieves alone in the empty hall and lies on the couch he left. Absent she hears him, absent sees him. Okay, man, she cannot think about anything but him. She's got it bad for him. And she hugs his son Ascanius on her lap, taken with the image of his father. Okay, she is so in love with him that she neglects her duties as queen. The towers she started no longer rise. You know, the work to build up the city's defenses, because she's not paying attention, stops. The young men no longer carry out their drill or work on the harbor and the battlements for defense in war. The interrupted work is left hanging, the huge threatening walls, the sky-reaching cranes. You know, the Romans saw other nations who did not have their army always training for war the way they did. They saw that as a lack of self-discipline. The idea is that the barbarians, and to a Roman, anybody who wasn't Roman was a barbarian. The barbarians are controlled, dominated by their emotions, by their feelings. And this is their great weakness. If you look at the graphic that I'm giving you to look at as I'm doing this, this is what is called the Roman Code. Aeneas is the embodiment of pietas. Pietas is where we get our word piety. In Latin, it means disciplined service. And you can see Aeneas's pietas when he is in love with Dido, so much so that the gods have to warn him that his business is to get to Italy. And when she confronts him, lines 255 to 268, by the way, he says that she's going to commit suicide when he leaves, which she in fact does. Look at Aeneas's response, line 269. He set his gaze firmly on Jupiter's warnings. Jupiter is the Roman name for Zeus, the king of the gods, and hid his pain steadfastly in his heart. This is what pietas means. You suppress your feelings, your emotions. You put them aside to do your duty. He replied briefly at last, O Queen, I will never deny that you deserve the most that can be spelled out in speech, nor will I regret my thoughts of you, Alyssa, while memory itself is mine and breath controls these limbs. I'll speak about the reality a little. I did not expect to conceal my departure by stealth, as she accused him of. Don't think that. Nor have I ever held the marriage torch or entered into that pact. Slam bam, thank you, ma'am. If the fates had allowed me to live my life under my own auspices, do what I wanted to do, and attend to my own concerns as I wished, I should first have cared for the city of Troy and the sweet relics of my family. Priam's high roofs would remain. But now it is Italy that Apollo's oracles order me to take. That is my desire. That is my country. Stop rousing yourself and me with your complaints. I do not take course for Italy of my own free will. This is Roman pietas. You put aside your feelings. To serve destiny and do your duty. It is self-control, self-discipline. And Rome's destiny, in this Roman code, appointed by the gods, is to rule the world. Their unique gift is politics. And you can see that in the selection I gave you, lines 286 to 290. This is the Roman self-image. Others, I can well believe, will hammer out bronze that breathes with more delicacy than us. Draw out living features from the marble. In other words, other nations may be better at making sculpture than we are. The Romans continued to admire and make copies of Greek sculptures. In fact, many of the Greek sculptures that we have actually survive not in Greek originals, but in Roman copies. The Romans didn't claim to be better than everybody at everything. Their idea was that every nation has its own gifts to contribute to world civilization. The Greeks make better sculptures than we do. Plead their causes better. The Greeks are better at literature and at philosophy than we Romans are. In fact, the Romans didn't really create anything new in philosophy. They continued the schools of philosophy that started in the Hellenistic era, particularly the Epicureans and the Stoics. Trace with instruments the movement of the skies and tell the rising of the constellations. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, make better astronomers and astrologers than we do. That's not our gift. Remember, Roman, it is for you to rule the nations with your power. That will be your skill, to crown peace with law, to spare the conquered and subdue the proud. The Romans thought that their gift was government. And part of what gave them that was this pietas, this self-discipline. In a sense, they thought that they were doing barbarians a favor by conquering them. They were, in effect, civilizing them. And it's because the Romans alone have this pietas that the gods have appointed them to rule. In order to fulfill that destiny, it's going to be necessary to subdue, to conquer, to tame the barbarian furor, passion. And the Romans wished that the barbarians would recognize the benefits of Roman civilization and submit voluntarily. And that's not quite as crazy as it first when you look in the next lesson at Roman art, you'll see that the Romans built things like aqueducts to bring fresh water into cities. And not just in Italy, but in the conquered provinces, where most of the people benefiting would not be Roman citizens. Okay? There really were benefits. They built a network of roads, some of which, by the way, are still in use, that were built to move their army around rapidly, but were used to create trade. People could move around freely and safely. They created what is called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And in the video you'll look at in the next lesson, you'll see how some of the art expressed that idea. But there really were practical benefits. The Romans used both the carrot and the stick. You know, if you rebelled, they put that down with force, but they also built stuff for conquered people, basically hoping that those people would say, hey, our own native kings never did this for us. Maybe we are better off under Roman rule. It would pacify people. Roman law had some characteristics that may sound familiar to you. Under Roman law, a person who was accused of a crime had the right to be considered innocent until he was proven guilty. He had the right to face his accuser in court so that there could be no secret testimony given. You know, if you were accused of a crime, you knew what testimony had been entered against you so that you had a chance to respond to it. And a Roman citizen had the right to appeal his case to the emperor in person. In fact, you encounter that in the New Testament. Paul was a Roman citizen, probably because of something that his father or grandfather had done for the Romans. And so when he's arrested in Jerusalem in the book of Acts, he appeals his case to the emperor, and the Roman governor, the occupying the same office that Pontius Pilate had held when Jesus was brought on trial. When Paul appeals to the emperor, then the procurator says to the emperor, you go. Because as a Roman citizen, Paul has that right. Jesus, who was not a Roman citizen, would not have had that right. Now, do those features of Roman law sound familiar? Innocent until proven guilty. The defendant has to know the evidence against him. The right of appeal. Yeah, American law gets those features from Roman law. Roman law is one of the two main sources for the American legal system. The other we'll get to in a later lesson is English common law. But this is the Roman image of themselves. The Roman hopes, wishes that the barbarians would recognize and submit. In fact, one Roman writer talks about great Romans who held whole nations of foreigners under their protection. Now, we would say under their control, under their power. We might even use a Latin word, under their dominion. But he says under their protection. Against whom are they being protected? Well, the Roman answer was against themselves. You ever gone anywhere with, say, a 5 or 6 year old child? One that's too big for you to carry? What do you do? Because little kids are impulsive. If they see something that attracts their attention, they're liable to make a beeline for it without looking to make sure there's not a car coming. You hold on to their hand. you're really protecting them against their own impulsive, undisciplined nature. Now you see where this is going? This is how the Romans saw their ruling over barbarian nations. They were like parents taking care of children. You wish they would submit voluntarily. But because they're barbarians, they probably won't recognize the benefits and will fight. And the Roman regrets the necessity of having to resort to force to subdue that barbarian furor. Now you see how this works with Aeneas and Dido? Aeneas is the embodiment of Roman pietas. He is self-disciplined. He doesn't act on his feelings. He puts his feelings aside to do his duty, to fulfill this destiny, which in his case is to go to Italy and become the ancestor of the Romans. Dido, on the other hand, is the embodiment of barbarian furor. She acts out of her feelings, her emotions. She has no self-control, no self-discipline. All the work on building up the city's defenses comes to a screeching halt because she is preoccupied with her love for Aeneas. But there are two ways of reading the Aeneid. The majority of scholars think that that Virgil holds these ideals all the way through. But there is a minority report. A minority report that says that as he's working on this, and it took him years to write the Aeneid, that he begins to realize that these ideas are dangerous. And I think you can see how they are dangerous if we look at two more recent ideas that actually are based on this Roman code. One you learned about in your American history classes in high school. What was that idea that was used to justify the westward expansion of European civilization in North America? It is our manifest destiny. Manifest just means obvious. It is our obvious destiny to conquer and civilize and subdue this wilderness and the wild savages within it. You suppose the Native Americans felt that they were being benefited, that they were being civilized by the Europeans? There was a European equivalent used to justify colonialism in Africa and Asia. It was called, I kid you not, the white man's burden. It is the burden that God has placed on white Europeans to civilize the people living in darkness in Africa and Asia. Now, never mind that there were civilizations there older than European civilization. You see what makes these ideas dangerous? If you believe that God or the gods have chosen you to rule over other people, then you will feel justified in using whatever methods are necessary in order to subdue them. And the resemblance between those ideas and this Roman code is not a coincidence. Remember, at the time that these ideas are developing, the late 1700s, early 1800s, it's the neoclassical era. Western culture is looking back to Greece and Rome for models. In fact, one of the things you needed to do in order to get into a university in the late 1700s in America was to translate the first 4 books of Virgil's Aeneid from Latin into English. Well, book 4 is where you have the love affair between Aeneas and Dido, where these ideas are most obvious. And if you're reading this not just as ancient literature, but as a blueprint for what it means to be civilized, what are you going to do? You're going to take these ideas and apply them to yourself and your situation, so that the European settlers in America and Europeans in Europe see themselves as the heirs to the Romans. They see the Native Americans, the Africans, the Asians as the heirs to the barbarians. And so they apply this Roman code to their own situations. The minority of scholars who think that Virgil comes to recognize this danger point to several peculiar passages in which they argue that Virgil plants clues that these ideas are dangerous. One of them I gave you in the excerpt, lines 291 to 297, where in book 6, Virgil in a dream goes to the underworld and he sees the Roman history waiting to enter the world, kind of a vision of the future, which of course he can make very accurate, because although it's future for Aeneas in the book, it's actually past at the time that Virgil is writing it. But an interest, when he goes in that dream, when he goes to leave the underworld, there's a really odd passage, line 294. There are 2 gates of sleep. One which is said to be of horn, cheap, through which an easy passage is given to truchets. The other gleams with the whiteness of polished ivory, much more expensive, but through it the gods of the dead send false dreams to the world above. After parting company with the ghost of his father Anchises, Aeneas and the Sibyl leave the underworld through the ivory gate, through the gate of false dreams. It's as if he's saying all that he's been writing is a load of hooey. At the end, there is a conflict in Italy after Aeneas has arrived there, where he and his rival Turnus are very much like Achilles and Hector in the Iliad. In fact, it's patterned after that, including the scene where the two of them fight. Turnus has killed Aeneas's friend Pallas, just like Hector killed Patroclus in the Iliad. And as they fight, the scene where Turnus, who is wounded, asks Aeneas to return him, or at least to return his dead body to his father. Pity my father's old age. Very reminiscent of the scene in the Iliad. And Aeneas is about to do that, but as he looks, he sees Pallas' sword belt diagonally across Turnus's chest. Line 369. Aeneas, blazing with fury, furor? Terrible in his anger. Says it's Pallas who sacrifices you with his stroke. So saying, burning with rage, he buried his sword deep in Turnus' breast. Is that the force that's necessary to subdue barbarian furor? Or is it Roman furor? Is Virgil saying that this Roman code is just a mask to hide Roman furor? I studied the Aeneid in grad school with one of the Minority Report scholars, but I'll let you decide. I would point out one thing. On his deathbed, Virgil asked that the manuscript of the Aeneid, still unpublished, be burned. Generations of college students have wished that had been carried out, but it was not. But do you think he would ask that his career's greatest work be burned because there were a few lines of poetry here and there that needed a little more polish? Next time we'll finish up our discussion of Rome with Roman art, the poetry of Catullus, and we'll talk a little bit about Roman theater.